One of the great relaxation shows that I find is Leave It to Beaver. It's one of those shows that you can drift off and escape reality for a short period of time. I think one of the main reasons this occurs is because of the great characters that you have in this show, and specifically one character that plays the part of Ward Cleaver, and that's Hugh Beaumont. He plays a father that is always in control, that always makes the right decisions, that always protects his family and provides for his family. So this takes you back to that comfort level you had when you were a child living in your parents' household. At least that's the way I see it. Hugh was born in Lawrence, Kansas, and his dad was a traveling salesman, so they ended up moving around quite a bit. He finally ended up graduating from high school in Chattanooga, Tennessee in the class of 1930. After that, he attended the University of Chattanooga, where he actually played football. Later, after he moved to California, he attended the University of Southern California, and he ended up getting a master's degree in theology in 1946. Now, theaters, nightclubs, and radio were where he got his original start back in 1931 into show business. It was 1940 before he started appearing in films, and he appeared in about 36 films. Many of them were bit parts and minor roles, ones that he wasn't even credited for. He went on to play numerous roles in shows like The Lone Ranger, Lassie, and My Friend Flicka. But then he got the great role on Leave It to Beaver. What a classic show this was, along with Barbara Billingsley, Tony Dow, and Jerry Mathers. He constantly was having to untangle the messes that Jerry Mathers and Tony Dow had gotten themselves in playing the Beaver and Wally. This show has kind of attained an iconic status in the U.S. because the Cleavers really were the idealized suburban family of the mid-20th century. Now, Hugh's family had a farm in Minnesota, and they would often retreat there each year to escape the grind of Hollywood. Just before filming the third season of Leave It to Beaver in 1959, he flew back from Minnesota to Hollywood while his wife, his son, and his mother-in-law actually traveled by car. Somewhere along their route back, they were involved in a car accident, and that car accident killed his mother-in-law and severely injured his son. I don't think his wife was very injured at all. As one can imagine, this tragedy seriously affected his performance and participation on the production of Leave It to Beaver at that time. He kind of just walked around in a daze, not really knowing what he was doing. On the website that Jerry Mathers has on the internet, there's an interesting article that his mother writes, or basically tells a story about the first time that she was introduced to Hugh Beaumont. I'll provide a link for this in the description of my video so that you can go ahead and check it out too, because it's a very interesting read. But the story goes, it just so happens that Jerry Mathers and Hugh Beaumont played father and son in a role prior to Leave It to Beaver. They were in a commercial for Rose Hill Memorial Park just outside of L.A., and this was a cemetery and funeral home that was a new expansion and was trying to boost sales by selling pre-need cemetery lots to people in the L.A. area. It's actually a short film. It lasts, I think, about 14 minutes. So it's a little different than most commercials, but it's something that they showed potential cemetery lot buyers as they were approached to buy pre-need properties. Once again, Hugh Beaumont plays the all-knowing and wise father to Leave It to Beaver's Jerry Mathers. But Jerry's mom tells the story how she met Hugh Beaumont while this filming was going on. And during a break during the filming, She started talking to him and found him to be a very personable guy, and their conversation ended up drifting into how Hollywood was at the time. You see, this was a time when motion pictures were on the decline and television was on the rise. So there were a lot of motion picture people that were actually out of work, and so the acting gigs were few and far between. All these big production lots stood empty, and studios were on the verge of going bankrupt. Hugh Beaumont ended up telling her how bad the times were for him because he had a wife and 3 kids to support, and that he was actually thinking of getting out of that line of work and finding something that was more consistent to do. She actually listened to him tell the story, and then she mentioned that her son Jerry had just done a pilot that had been sold and that was going into production very soon. And they were actually looking for someone to play that father. But she wasn't sure. She thought it might be too late, and they may have already hired somebody. When little Jerry got home that night, when he was saying his bedtime prayers, he actually said, "Please God, make the actor I worked with today my father in the new TV series." And when Jerry ended up walking in that very first day of rehearsals for Leave It to Beaver, he was extremely happy to see Hugh Beaumont there cast as Ward Cleaver. Now, if you talk to Hugh Beaumont's daughter, Kristen Beaumont, she'll tell you that her dad was the real deal, that he actually had a lot of input into the character, and that character actually mimics him quite a bit in real life. She states that when they were in trouble, that they usually had to sit down and talk with their dad, just like in the show, and that he never yelled or got upset. She felt like he took his responsibility on that show very seriously and wanted to portray a very good father on the show. Now, despite all of his success on the show, he wasn't fazed at all by fame. As a matter of fact, when the cameras stopped rolling, he found comfort in his family and in the great outdoors. His daughter says that he loved poetry and he had this infectious laugh, and that he considered the annual trip to Minnesota the high point of the year. He got to spend tons of time with his family, hiking, swimming, and fishing. And they didn't even care if they caught any fish. It was just the time they spent together. It said that he was pretty relentless as a driver. When they would make the long trip back, they would drive all the way through, 36 hours. Can you imagine doing that with kids in the car? His daughter Kristen says that she still listens to the advice of her father and still hears his words as she lives life today. She states that her father believed that if you wanted to change anything, you had to start very small, that you couldn't do everything at once. He always used to tell his kids, start by tying your shoes first. What great guidance this is. After his retirement from show business in the late 1960s, he launched a second career. He was a Christmas tree farmer in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. In 1972, he was forced to retire from this after having a stroke that he never really completely recovered from. On May 14, 1982, Hugh Beaumont died of a heart attack while he was visiting his son, who was a psychologist that was working in Munich, Germany at the time. His body was cremated and the ashes were scattered on the family farm near Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Thank you so much, Hugh Beaumont, for the outstanding role of Ward Cleaver on Leave It to Beaver. What a great inspiration you were for so many young people at this time. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.